I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and of all things visible and invisible, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. Throughout the world, wherever Christians gather and worship, they often join in reciting these simple words of testimony to their common belief in the divinity of Jesus. Christians are people who follow the religious teachings of Jesus as recounted in the Christian Gospels. Christians live in practically every nation of the earth and share the belief that Jesus is the Son of God who lived on earth as a human, suffered pain, then rose from the dead. But although Jesus of Nazareth is the common focus of their faith, the ways Christians express that belief and the places where they worship can seem very different indeed. While it may sometimes seem as though Christians belong to many religions instead of only one, as a whole, they make up the largest religious group on earth today. About 1/4 of the world's population are Christians. The Christian Bible, the sacred scriptures of the Christian faith, contains the complete Jewish Bible, which Christians call the Old Testament, and a collection of later books written during the 100 or so years after Jesus, which is known as the New Testament. The word gospel means good news, and Christianity is based on accounts of the life of Jesus found in the Gospels, 4 books of the New Testament. Here is that story, as told in the Christian Bible and as depicted by artists over the centuries. Jesus was born some 2,000 years ago in southern Palestine, site of modern-day Israel, where Judaism had previously emerged as the first religion to recognize only one God. The Bible recounts that there, too, God transmitted to Moses the 10 Commandments, or rules, that lie at the heart of both the Jewish and Christian faiths. Ancient Jewish leaders had a vision of a coming Messiah, or anointed one, who would one day redeem the world. Christians believe that prophecy came to pass when the angel Gabriel told a young woman named Mary that she would bear a child to be called Jesus, who would be the Son of God. When it was time for Mary to give birth, she and her husband Joseph traveled from their home in Nazareth to the city of Bethlehem to be taxed by the Roman rulers. The Bible goes on to tell that there was no room at the inn, so Mary gave birth to the infant Jesus in a stable and laid him in a manger. Meanwhile, an angel appeared to shepherds guarding their flocks in the fields nearby. The shepherds were afraid, but the angel told them he brought them joyous news of Jesus' birth. So the shepherds hurried to the stable in Bethlehem, where they fell to their knees before the infant Jesus and praised God. The Bible then describes the arrival of wise men called the Magi, who had traveled many miles from the east following a bright new star. They too knelt in worship before the baby Jesus. The Magi had brought many splendid gifts. They also warned Mary and Joseph that the Roman king feared the newborn child and sought to destroy him. So Jesus' family fled to safety in the land of Egypt. When the danger had passed, they returned to the land of Palestine, where the Gospels say Jesus passed his childhood in the city of Nazareth and learned the craft of his father Joseph, who was a carpenter. At the age of 12, it is said that Jesus displayed great learning and wisdom, but the Gospels say nothing more regarding his life until he was about 30 years old. Then he was baptized by John the Baptist and began traveling across the land, preaching to all who would listen. People called him Rabbi, which means teacher, and his followers named him Jesus the Christ, meaning Jesus the Messiah. It is written in the Gospels that Jesus once said, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep." For although many honored him, some mocked and feared this new religious reformer, and Jesus knew of the things that were to befall him. The Bible further recounts that Jesus called 2 fishermen, Peter and Andrew, to follow him and become fishers of men. They were the first of 12 disciples, or followers, that Jesus called to preach the gospel. According to the Gospels, Jesus performed many miracles, healing the sick and blind, and restoring life to the dead. Many young children were brought to be blessed, and Jesus is said to have told his disciples, "Suffer little children to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven." To all he preached a message of love. In the Gospel's narrative of the Sermon on the Mount, he taught his listeners, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." When Jesus arrived in the city of Jerusalem for Passover week, people cheered and cleared a path before him. But the Roman rulers feared his popularity, while the Jewish leaders rejected his calls for reform. Jesus had a final meal with his disciples in Jerusalem, a meal that is often called the Last Supper. The Gospels explain that he gave his disciples bread to represent his body and wine to represent his blood. Jesus knew that one of his disciples would later betray him to his enemies, but he submitted himself to God's will. The Jewish leaders took Jesus before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, charging him with treason against Rome. When the angry crowd demanded Jesus' crucifixion, Pilate agreed. Death by crucifixion was a common form of punishment in the Roman Empire. The Roman soldiers mocked Jesus, placed a crown of sharp thorns on his head, struck him, and forced him to carry his own heavy wooden cross to the place of crucifixion. The Bible goes on to tell that Jesus was nailed to a cross between the crosses of 2 condemned thieves on a hill outside Jerusalem. After Jesus died, the Gospels say that his disciples lowered him from the cross, and his body was taken to a tomb that was sealed with a heavy stone. But 3 days later, on a Sunday, the stone had been rolled away, and his disciples found the tomb empty. According to Christian belief, God had raised Jesus from the dead in what is known as the resurrection. With the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus the Christ, the story of Christianity had just begun. The earliest Christians, like Jesus himself, were Jews who at first practiced Jewish customs. But they later adopted Sunday, rather than Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath, as their day of worship, because they believed the resurrection occurred on a Sunday. Soon, many non-Jews converted to the new faith as his disciples spread the teachings of Jesus to other lands. It is commonly believed that the Apostle Peter traveled to Rome and became that city's first Christian bishop. Others took the Christian message throughout areas bordering the Mediterranean Sea. Although the new religion continued to attract followers, many early Christians suffered harsh treatment at the hands of the Romans. But despite efforts to stop the spread of the new faith, by the end of the 4th century, Christianity had become the official religion of the entire Roman Empire, and construction of many of the first great Christian churches began. During the Middle Ages, the Pope, then the spiritual head of Western Christians, exercised great political as well as spiritual authority. But while the church was becoming more involved in worldly affairs, some believers took vows of poverty and withdrew to secluded monasteries and convents. At that time, the men and women who lived in those communities, called monks and nuns, were among the few people who could read and write. So monasteries and convents became great centers of learning, while members of such religious orders as the Franciscans began to work among the people, following the selfless example of a man who loved all living things, St. Francis of Assisi. The period called the Middle Ages also saw military expeditions called the Crusades try unsuccessfully to retake Palestine, the land of Jesus' ministry, from its Muslim rulers. About the same time, Christians split apart due to disagreements over beliefs, the church calendar, and the authority of the Pope. This divided the church into the Eastern Orthodox churches, centered in Constantinople, and the Roman Catholic Church, based in Rome. Some 1,400 years after the birth of Jesus, copies of the Bible were painstakingly made by hand. So much of the people's knowledge of Christian scriptures came from murals and other artworks displayed in churches. But during a period of history called the Renaissance, one of the great inventions of modern times led to the printing of large quantities of the Bible by mechanical means. Using ideas developed earlier in Asia, a German named Johannes Gutenberg invented movable metallic type that made it possible to produce splendidly printed Bibles on the world's first printing press. In time, the Bible was translated into many languages and read throughout the world. Another great milestone in the history of Christianity resulted from a movement called the Reformation, led by the German monk and scholar Martin Luther. In the year 1517, Luther posted on the door of a German church his famous 95 Theses, protesting some of the ways in which the church abused its power. Luther and his followers soon discovered that he had caused a further split within Christianity, this time between Protestants, or protesters, and Roman Catholics. The Lutheran Church, which traces its origins to Luther, is one of many Protestant denominations that grew out of the Reformation. John Calvin, a French Protestant reformer, also rejected some of the teachings and practices of the Roman Catholic Church. Calvin's teachings were important in the development of the Presbyterian Church, a Protestant denomination. Another denomination, the Church of England, was established after King Henry VIII of England declared his independence from the Pope. And so Christianity, the world religion that began in Palestine some 2,000 years ago, evolved into three distinct groups. Roman Catholics, headed by the Bishop of Rome, called the Pope. Protestants, who in turn belonged to many denominations. And the Eastern Orthodox churches of such countries as Russia, Greece, Armenia, and Syria. All share the belief that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, who gave his life on the cross for the salvation of humanity. I am the resurrection and the life. Whosoever believeth in me shall not perish, but shall have eternal life. These words, said to have been spoken by Jesus, the Christ, lie at the heart of one of the world's major religions. Christianity, which began in Palestine some 2,000 years ago, takes its name from Jesus of Nazareth, whom Christians believe to be the Son of God, who gave his life on the cross for the salvation of humanity. The new religion spread quickly throughout Europe in the centuries after Jesus' death and resurrection. Originally formed as one church, eventually Christianity split into three distinct branches: the Roman Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox churches that today represent many nationality groups, and Protestantism, which arose from a movement started by Martin Luther called the Reformation. In time, missionaries, people who seek to spread their faith to others, helped to extend Christianity from Europe to other parts of the world. Spanish missions are reminders of early Roman Catholic settlement in what is now the American Southwest. Protestants also brought their form of Christianity to some of the original American colonies. Pocahontas, the daughter of a Native American chief, was an early convert to Christianity. In England, some Protestants called separatists split away from the Church of England and sailed to the American colonies seeking religious freedom. One such group became known as the Pilgrims. Canada's first planned community, Ste. Marie, located in what is now the province of Ontario, and Montreal, the largest city in the present-day Canadian province of Quebec, both began as Roman Catholic religious colonies. Like the Pilgrims before them, English Protestants called Quakers or Friends were often treated harshly in their homeland. This led William Penn to found Pennsylvania, a new American colony where people of all faiths could have religious freedom. Known for his fairness in dealing with Native Americans, Penn governed by the principles of his faith. 150 years later, another famous Pennsylvanian, Bishop Richard Allen, influenced Christianity when he founded the first African-American Protestant church in the United States. Not long after, Joseph Smith established the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Mormon Church, a Protestant denomination that has grown to worldwide membership through its missionary activities. Also, during the 19th century, missionaries such as the American Baptist clergyman Adoniram Judson helped carry Christianity to parts of Asia. Father Damien, a Belgian-born Roman Catholic missionary, traveled to Hawaii, where he cared for people suffering from a disease called leprosy. While Mother Frances Xavier Cabrini founded the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart, a Roman Catholic religious order. Mother Cabrini was the first United States citizen to be named a saint by her church. During the 20th century, Christianity has continued to change and grow. In the early years of the century, spellbinding preachers called evangelists drew huge crowds to hear the message of the Gospels, while new forms of music found their way into Christian worship. The 20th century also saw the Salvation Army, which had begun in England, expand into a religious and charitable organization that today operates on a worldwide scale. A major 20th century development within Christianity has been the ecumenical or whole world movement, which seeks to resolve differences and unify Christians around the world. The World Council of Churches, which includes many Orthodox and Protestant denominations, grew out of that movement. In a landmark series of meetings known as Vatican Council II, Roman Catholic leadership adopted many reforms and endorsed some of the goals of the ecumenical movement, although the Catholic Church itself is not a member of the World Council. As a result of these developments, Christians today are more tolerant of one another's beliefs. Still, the idea of one church, one faith may still be a thing of the distant future, for every church has its own distinct history, practices, and articles of faith. What are some of the main practices that distinguish present-day Christians? Unlike Protestants, the Roman Catholic and Orthodox churches accord a very special place to Mary, the mother of Jesus, while both the Roman Catholic and Orthodox churches declare some special holy people to be saints, among them Joan of Arc. Leadership within Christianity also differs greatly. The Roman Catholic Church is headed by a single leader called the Pope, while Orthodox churches do not recognize any one leader, but are led by bishops called patriarchs, or great fathers. Some Protestant churches elect their leaders, but the head of the Church of England is appointed by the monarch of the British royal family. One of the most important single issues dividing Christians today concerns the eligibility of women to serve as priests and ministers. Yet despite their diversity, most Christians observe similar ceremonies and celebrations based on their belief in the life and teaching of Jesus as recounted in the New Testament. Many, but not all, Christians welcome both babies and adults into the church in a rite called baptism. Most, but not all, Christians share the memory of Jesus' death and resurrection in a ceremony known by such names as the Mass, the Lord's Supper, and communion. Marriage is another principal ceremony, and all Christian churches encourage their members to hold their wedding vows sacred. Christians also observe many celebrations throughout the year. Palm Sunday, which falls in the spring, marks the day Christians believe Jesus was welcomed to Jerusalem by crowds who scattered palm branches in his path. This is followed a week later by Easter, the most important Christian festival, which marks the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. On December 25th, the majority of Christian churches celebrate the birth of Jesus, whom Christians believe was born in a humble Bethlehem stable. Christmas is the second great festival of the Christian year. In Mexico, live manger scenes recall Jesus' birth, and Christians everywhere rejoice by singing the beautiful hymns and carols of the season. But church worship is only one expression of the Christian tradition, which also includes church-sponsored schools, reaching out to help the poor and homeless, assisting people at home and abroad to realize their fullest potential, marching for world peace, voicing personal concerns about nuclear arms, caring for the sick and dying. In modern times, some of the highest expressions of this religious tradition are seen in those 20th century Christian leaders who have won the Nobel Prize for Peace. They include Albert Schweitzer, a Protestant medical missionary to Africa, the Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr., an American Baptist minister who gave his life in the nonviolent struggle for civil rights, Mother Teresa, a Roman Catholic nun who has been called a modern saint for her devotion to the sick and poor, and Desmond Tutu, an Anglican bishop who has waged a nonviolent campaign for civil rights in his South African homeland. Just as Christianity has influenced people in their personal conduct, so too the Christian tradition has long been a major influence in the arts. The early Italian poet Dante Alighieri and the 18th century African-American poet Phyllis Wheatley are among countless writers who have drawn inspiration from the Bible. And while many Christian churches are quite simple in appearance, the great cathedrals of the Western world are soaring architectural monuments to Christian belief in the divine. Much of the world's most memorable music celebrates Christian beliefs. While now, as in centuries past, artists continue to inspire others with their personal interpretations of religious themes. So, be it through influence on personal conduct or artistic expression, today, as when it began some 2,000 years ago, Christianity continues to play an important role in Western civilization.